The showroom smelled like ambition. Cool air, polished concrete, and the faint trace of leather that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Every surface gleamed. Every car sat under its own private halo of light, angled just so, as if the vehicles themselves understood they were being worshipped. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early November, the kind of day that feels thin and colorless outside but warm and curated inside places built for people with money. Marcus Hale walked through the glass door slowly, not because he lacked confidence, but because his daughter Lily had stopped to press her small palm flat against the hood of a silver coupe parked near the entrance. The way children touch things they find beautiful and don't yet understand they aren't supposed to. He let her. He always let her. She was 7 years old and she had her mother's curiosity and her father's eyes. Dark, steady, observant. And Marcus had long ago decided that the world could wait while Lily looked at things that made her wonder. He was wearing what he always wore when he wasn't in the lab. Dark jeans, a gray Henley, a jacket that had seen 3 winters and showed it. His boots were clean but not new. There was nothing about him that announced itself. That was perhaps the problem. Or rather, that was what made him a target. The dealership was busy in the particular way luxury spaces get busy on weekday afternoons, not crowded but populated by a specific kind of person moving at a specific kind of pace. The pace of people who have never once had to check a price tag before picking something up. Sales associates drifted between customers with practiced ease, smiling the smiles of people trained to make wealth feel casual. Marcus had barely made it 10 feet inside when he noticed the shift. A subtle tightening in the room, the way certain eyes moved to him and then away, the way one young associate started toward him and then slowed, recalibrated, and turned toward a couple near the far wall instead. He was used to it. He didn't like it, but he was used to it. He guided Lily gently by the shoulder toward the center of the floor, where a deep blue sedan sat on a raised platform, rotating almost imperceptibly on a motorized display stand. Lily's mouth opened. She grabbed his hand. That was when Catherine Voss walked in. She entered the way people enter rooms when they have never once doubted their right to be in them. For associates materialized around her within seconds, doors were held, voices lowered to a register of attentive reverence. She was the CEO of a regional logistics empire, the kind of woman whose name appeared in local business journals alongside words like visionary and disruptor. She wore a charcoal blazer and moved like someone perpetually late to something more important than wherever she currently was. She was there to finalize the purchase of the dealership's most expensive model, a decision she had apparently already made and communicated in advance, because the general manager was already walking toward her with an outstretched hand and a folder. Marcus had stepped to the side to let Lily get a closer look at the blue sedan, crouching down beside her to point out the curve of the rear panel, the way the light caught the bodywork differently depending on the angle. Things Lily didn't fully understand yet but listened to anyway because her father's voice when he talked about cars was unlike his voice at any other time, quieter and more alive at once. He didn't notice Catherine Voss until she was standing almost directly behind them. He heard her first. "Excuse me," she said, and the 2 words carried inside them an entire architecture of impatience and assumption. He stood and turned. She was looking at him the way people look at something mildly inconvenient. A wet umbrella left in a doorway, a cart abandoned in a parking lot lane. Her gaze moved from his jacket to his boots and back up, and something in her expression settled into a decision. "Are you lost?" she asked. Not unkindly, exactly. That was almost the worst part. She said it the way you might say it to someone confused, someone who had wandered somewhere they didn't belong through no real fault of their own. Charitable condescension. The associates nearby said nothing. The general manager glanced over and looked away. Lily looked up at her father. Marcus looked at Catherine Voss for a moment, just a moment, and then he said quietly, "No, we're fine, thank you." And Catherine Voss laughed. It was a small laugh, barely a sound, shared mostly with the associate standing closest to her. But Lily heard it, and Marcus felt it land the way those things always land. Not loudly, but permanently. Marcus Hale had not always been the kind of man who went unnoticed. There was a time, early in his career, in the years before grief reorganized everything, when he had walked into rooms with the particular energy of someone whose work was beginning to matter, someone standing at the edge of a reputation that was still being built but was already quietly impressive. He had graduated top of his mechanical engineering class at a state university that didn't have the brand recognition of the coastal schools but produced, year after year, engineers who understood that real knowledge lived in application, not in theory alone. His thesis on variable compression ratios in high-performance internal combustion engines had been cited twice in industry journals before he was 25. His professor, a retired automotive consultant named Dr. Emil Reeves, who had spent 20 years working with European manufacturers, had told him once, without ceremony or exaggeration, that Marcus had the rarest kind of engineering mind, one that could hold precision and intuition at the same time. Marcus had not known what to do with that compliment then. He knew what to do with it now. He had joined a mid-sized automotive engineering firm at 26, the kind of company that did contract work for larger manufacturers, invisible labor inside visible products, the unglamorous but essential backbone of an industry that preferred to put designers and executives on magazine covers rather than the men and women who figured out why engines failed and how to make them not fail anymore. He was good at it immediately and better at it within 2 years. He had a quality that is difficult to teach and impossible to fake. He could listen to an engine the way a doctor listens to a chest, hearing in the rhythm and resistance of mechanical systems things that others needed instruments to detect. His colleagues respected him. His supervisors relied on him. And then, at 31, he met Clara. Clara was a landscape architect with paint-stained hands and an unshakable opinion about every film she had ever seen, which was most of them. She was funny in the specific way that intelligent people are funny, not performing humor but finding it, noticing the absurd thing inside the ordinary moment and pointing at it quietly so only the people paying attention would catch it. Marcus had been paying attention from the first conversation. They were married within 18 months. Lily arrived 2 years after that, small and loud and certain of herself from the very first week, and Marcus had stood in the hospital room holding her with the feeling that everything he had built until that moment had been, without his knowing it, preparation for this. They were happy. That is worth saying plainly, without decoration, because what came after requires that the happiness be established as real and not as a setup for sentimentality. They were genuinely, quietly, daily happy, in the way that people are happy when they have chosen correctly and know it. Clara died when Lily was 2 years old. A diagnosis that moved faster than the doctors had prepared them for, a series of months that Marcus has never described to anyone in full and likely never will. He managed the hospital visits and the treatments and the paperwork and the fear with the same methodical steadiness he brought to engineering problems, because it was the only way he knew how to hold himself together, and falling apart was not something he allowed himself while Clara still needed him to be present. When she was gone, he kept going. Not dramatically, not heroically. He simply kept going, the way parents do, because Lily needed breakfast and a bath and someone to read to her at night and someone to be there in the morning, and Marcus was the one who was there. He restructured his entire professional life around her. He negotiated a remote-first arrangement with his firm before remote work was a common conversation, not because he wanted flexibility in the trendy sense, but because he needed to be the one who dropped Lily at school and picked her up and was present for the small, unremarkable moments that he had come to understand were not unremarkable at all. He took a modest house in a modest neighborhood. He drove a 10-year-old sedan that he maintained himself with the kind of intimate mechanical familiarity that meant it would outlast cars half its age. He spent money on Lily's books and Lily's art supplies and Lily's curiosity, and he spent almost nothing on himself, not out of martyrdom but out of a clear-eyed understanding of what mattered and what didn't. His work, during these years, had quietly grown in significance in ways that his life gave no outward indication of. A fuel efficiency system he had developed and patented at 34 had been licensed by 2 major manufacturers. A design contribution he had made to a performance engine series, uncredited in the public-facing materials as contract engineering work typically is, had become a foundational element in a line of vehicles that had won industry awards and sold in numbers that would have surprised people who assumed innovation came from the top of organizations rather than from contract engineers working in home offices while their daughters slept down the hall. He had never sought recognition for any of it. This was not false modesty. It was something closer to indifference, a genuine inability to locate the part of himself that was supposed to care about credit when the work itself was interesting and the money was sufficient and Lily was healthy and growing and starting to ask questions about how engines worked because she had heard him talking about them her whole life, and the curiosity had simply absorbed into her the way children absorb everything that surrounds them consistently enough. That was the man who had walked into the dealership on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Not a man down on his luck. Not a man who had stumbled or failed or been left behind. A man who had made deliberate choices about what mattered, and who wore those choices on the outside in ways that certain people, looking quickly and without care, consistently misread as diminishment. Catherine Voss had not become who she was by being careless. That is important to understand, because the easiest version of this story would make her a simple villain, cruel, hollow, cartoonishly dismissive, and that version would be both dishonest and ultimately less damning than the truth. The truth was that Catherine Voss was sharp, disciplined, and had built something genuinely difficult to build. Her logistics company employed over 400 people. She had started it at 33 with a small business loan and a contact list and an ability to see inefficiencies in supply chains that others had simply accepted as the cost of doing business. She had grown it through a combination of relentless work and a particular kind of social intelligence. The ability to read rooms, to understand what people wanted to hear, to position herself and her company in whatever light the moment required. She was not stupid. She was not lazy. She was, however, deeply and perhaps irreparably convinced that she could assess a person's worth within the first 30 seconds of encountering them, and that this ability was one of her gifts rather than one of her failures. She had developed this conviction over years of business dealings in which surface signals, the quality of a suit, the confidence of an entrance, the brand of a watch, had correlated, often enough, with the kind of people she wanted in her orbit. She had built a mental shorthand from these correlations, and she had stopped questioning it because it had served her well enough in the rooms she typically occupied. The problem was that the shorthand was a tool designed for a very specific environment, and she applied it everywhere, including places where it had no business being applied at all. She noticed Marcus the way she noticed obstacles, briefly, efficiently, and with an immediate categorization that required no further investigation. Worn jacket, scuffed boots, child in tow, not a buyer, possibly a service department customer who had wandered through the wrong door. Certainly not someone whose presence required her attention or her courtesy. The small laugh she had shared with her associate after Marcus's quiet response had not felt, to her, like cruelty. It had felt like the natural release of a mild social awkwardness, the slight absurdity of someone out of place insisting, politely, that they were fine. She had already moved on, mentally, before the sound had fully left her. This was characteristic of her. She was always already moving on. Her assistant had once described her, admiringly, as someone who processed situations at a different speed than other people. What the assistant had perhaps not considered was that speed, applied to human judgment, is not always a virtue. It is sometimes just a faster way to be wrong. What Catherine Voss did not know, could not have known, because she had not bothered to find out, was that the dealership she was standing in had recently become one of 17 locations authorized to carry a new performance sedan from a manufacturer whose flagship engine series had been significantly redesigned in its latest generation. The redesign had been led, in substantial part, by a contract engineering team. The contract engineering team's lead contributor on the fuel management and compression systems, the elements that had drawn the most praise in early industry reviews, the elements that had caused one automotive journalist to write that the new engine felt like it had been tuned by someone who genuinely loved engines rather than someone who had been assigned to improve them, was a quiet man in a gray Henley who was currently crouching beside his daughter and pointing at the way light moved across a rear quarter panel. Catherine Voss was 44 years old, and she had spent those 44 years becoming someone who mattered in rooms. She had never once considered that some of the most consequential people she would ever encounter would be entirely uninterested in matching in rooms. That blindness, not her ambition, not her success, not her sharp elbows or her fast processing or her social shorthand, that blindness was the thing that was about to cost her something she would feel for a long time afterward. Not her reputation exactly, not her business. Something quieter and more personal than either of those things. The awareness, arriving too late and all at once, that she had looked at a person and seen nothing, and that the person she had seen nothing and had, in fact, been everything she claimed to admire: competence, discipline, quiet excellence, the willingness to do difficult work without requiring an audience for it. She would feel that awareness the way you feel the specific embarrassment of a mistake that cannot be attributed to bad luck or difficult circumstances but only to a failure of attention. The kind of mistake that holds up a mirror. The kind of mirror that is very hard to look away from once you have seen what it shows. The general manager's name was Robert Ains, and he had been running this particular dealership for 11 years with the patient, detail-oriented competence of someone who genuinely loved the product he sold and knew more about it than most people who sold it. He was the kind of man who read engineering specs for pleasure, who subscribed to 3 automotive trade publications, who could tell you not just the horsepower figures for every car on his floor but the specific engineering decisions that produced those figures and why they mattered. He had recognized Marcus Hale's name the moment the appointment had been scheduled 2 weeks earlier, because Robert Ains read the trade publications carefully, and Marcus's name appeared in them with increasing frequency, usually in the context of phrases like significant contribution and quietly influential and the kind of engineering work that doesn't make headlines but makes the headlines possible. He had been making his way across the showroom floor toward Marcus when the encounter with Catherine Voss had occurred. He had seen it. He had seen the laugh. He had seen Lily's small face turn upward toward her father with a question in it that Marcus had answered with the slightest pressure of his hand on her shoulder. A gesture so small and so complete that Robert had felt it from 15 feet away. He had paused, recalibrated, and then continued walking, because the moment required careful handling and Robert Ains was, above all things, a careful man. "Mr. Hale," he said, and his voice carried across the showroom floor with a warmth and a specificity that were impossible to misread. Not the professional warmth of a sales greeting. The genuine warmth of someone addressing a person they have wanted to meet. Marcus stood. They shook hands. "Robert Ains, I'm glad you came in. We've been looking forward to this." Catherine Voss, who had been mid-sentence with her own associate, stopped. The general manager of a luxury dealership did not use the phrase "we've been looking forward to this" with men in worn jackets unless something was happening that she had not been informed of, and Catherine Voss had a finely calibrated sensitivity to information she had not been given. She watched. Robert guided Marcus and Lily toward the centerpiece of the showroom, the new performance sedan, the deep blue one that Lily had already identified, with a child's unerring instinct, as the most beautiful thing in the room. "We have the full spec sheet as you requested," Robert said, producing a folder. "And the engineering team at the manufacturer asked me to pass along that they hope you're pleased with how the production model reflects the design work. Their words were," he glanced at a note, "we tried not to ruin it." Marcus smiled at that. It was a real smile, unguarded, the kind that appears when something is genuinely funny rather than when something is supposed to be. "That's generous of them," he said. "I had good material to work with." Lily had pressed her face close to the driver's side window, hands cupped around her eyes to see inside. Marcus stepped beside her and opened the door. Robert had quietly indicated it was unlocked, and Lily climbed into the driver's seat with a solemnity that suggested she understood, on some level, that this was a significant moment. She wrapped her small hands around the steering wheel and looked straight ahead through the windshield with an expression of complete seriousness. Marcus crouched beside the open door and watched her. There was a silence between them that was entirely full. Catherine Voss's associate had leaned close to say something quietly to her. She was listening, but she was watching Marcus and Lily, and something in her expression had begun to shift. Not dramatically, not yet, but in the way that certainty shifts when it begins to encounter information it was not prepared for. Robert Ains, who had positioned himself at a polite but visible distance, said to no one in particular, or perhaps to the room in general, "The compression system in this engine is genuinely unlike anything in the current market. The feel at low RPM, the efficiency curve, it reads like it was designed by someone who understood not just the engineering but the experience of driving. We've had customers come in just to hear it idle." He paused. "The lead engineer on that system is someone who has been in the industry for years doing work that most people in this room will never know they've benefited from." He said it simply, without theater. He was not performing a revelation. He was stating a fact that happened to land in a room where it carried enormous weight. Catherine Voss set down the brochure she had been holding. Lily, from inside the car, said clearly and without context, "Daddy says the engine in this one breathes differently than the others." She said it the way children repeat things they have heard many times, faithfully without fully understanding, but with complete confidence in the source. Marcus looked at his daughter and then, briefly, at nothing in particular, the private expression of a person absorbing a moment they will remember. Robert Ains made a small sound that was not quite a laugh but was close to one. Catherine Voss said nothing. She was doing the rapid, uncomfortable arithmetic of someone who has just realized that the assumptions that led them to a particular action were not just incorrect but were incorrect in a direction that revealed something unflattering about the person who made them. It was Lily who made it impossible to look away from. Not Marcus. Not Robert Haynes. Not the quiet, accumulating weight of professional revelations settling over the showroom like weather. It was Lily, 7 years old, climbing carefully out of the driver's seat of the performance sedan and walking directly to Catherine Voss with the purposeful, unself-conscious directness that children deploy before they learn to be cautious about social distance. Catherine Voss saw her coming and did what adults do when children approach them unexpectedly. She arranged her face into something approximating warmth, the practiced, slightly stiff warmth of a person who does not spend a great deal of time around children and is aware of it. Lily stopped in front of her and looked up. "You were rude to my dad," she said, not accusingly, not with anger, with the same clear, declarative certainty she used when she identified a bird outside the kitchen window or announced that dinner needed more salt. It was a statement of observed fact. It was devastating precisely because it contained no drama. The associate beside Catherine Voss made a small involuntary sound. Robert Haynes, across the room, became very still. Marcus said, quietly, "Lily," just her name, just one word, but it carried in it the full complexity of a parent who is simultaneously proud and pained and protective and present. Lily did not look away from Catherine Voss. Catherine Voss, to her credit, did not look away from Lily either. There are moments that arrive too fast for the social machinery to intercept them. Moments where the gap between who you present yourself as and who you have just been is too wide and too public to be navigated with the usual tools of redirection and professional composure. This was one of those moments. Every person in the immediate vicinity of that conversation was watching it, and everyone watching it understood what was happening with perfect clarity, because children have a gift for moral simplicity that adults have spent years learning to complicate. She had been rude to his dad. That was the whole of it. That was everything. Catherine Voss was a woman who had spent 2 decades constructing a professional identity built on the premise that she was direct, fair, and perceptive. She had given speeches about the importance of seeing people clearly, of not letting surface impressions override deeper assessment, of building organizations that valued substance over signal. She had meant those speeches or had believed she meant them, which in her experience had always been close enough to the same thing. Standing in front of a 7-year-old girl who had just calmly and publicly identified the precise distance between those speeches and her behavior 40 minutes earlier, Catherine Voss felt something that her professional life had given her very few opportunities to feel. She felt small. Not humiliated in the way she might feel humiliated by a business failure or a public criticism from a rival. Small in a more fundamental way, the way you feel small when someone holds up evidence of who you have chosen to be, and the evidence is difficult to argue with, and the person holding it up is a child who has not yet learned that the world generally prefers you to look away. Marcus had moved to stand beside Lily now, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. He was not looking at Catherine Voss with satisfaction or with anger. He was looking at her with something closer to patience. The patient, level look of a man who has encountered the specific variety of moment many times and has long since decided that the most useful response to it is simply to remain standing, simply to be exactly who he is, and to allow the situation to complete itself without his interference. This, perhaps more than anything else, was what made the moment as difficult as it was for Catherine Voss. He was not enjoying it. He was not performing dignity. He simply had it, the way he had always had it, quietly and without effort, the way you have things that were built into you rather than acquired. Catherine Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then she crouched down. It was not a graceful movement. She was wearing heels and a fitted blazer, and crouching was not something the outfit was designed to accommodate. But she did it anyway, bringing herself to Lily's eye level with a deliberateness that suggested she had made a decision and was executing it before she could reconsider. "You're right," she said to Lily. "I was." Lily considered this for a moment with the judicial seriousness of someone weighing whether an apology is adequate restitution. Then she said, "Okay," and turned and walked back to her father and took his hand. The matter apparently concluded to her satisfaction. Catherine Voss stood. She smoothed her blazer. She looked at Marcus Hale, and she did something that had not come easily to her for a very long time. She let the composed, managed surface of her professional self go quiet, and she spoke as a person rather than as a CEO. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one, not a managed one." Marcus looked at her steadily. "You don't need to." "I'd like to," she said, "if you'll allow it." There was something in her voice that was different from the tone she had carried since she walked through the door. The velocity was gone, the forward momentum of a person perpetually processing toward the next thing. She was, for this moment, simply present. "I looked at you and I made a decision," she said. "A fast one. The kind I make without thinking because I've made it so many times that I've stopped noticing I'm making it. And I was wrong. Not just about who you are professionally, though I understand now that I was spectacularly wrong about that, but about the more basic thing. The thing that should have come before any of that." She paused. "You were here with your daughter. That should have been enough." Marcus held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once slowly, the nod of a man who has accepted something and means it, not the nod of a man performing forgiveness for an audience. "Thank you," he said. "It was enough." Robert Ains, who had been navigating the delicate task of being present without intruding, chose this moment to suggest, with practiced ease, that he could give them both some time to look at the vehicles separately, and the machinery of the afternoon began to reassemble itself into something more ordinary. But before Catherine Voss turned back to her own appointment, she paused and looked at Lily, who was now crouched beside one of the display car's rear wheels, examining the brake caliper with focused attention, narrating something quietly to herself in the way children narrate their own investigations. "What's her name?" she asked Marcus. "Lily," he said. Catherine Voss watched Lily for a moment. "She's going to be something," she said. It was not a performance. It was an observation, genuine and slightly wondering, the kind of thing you say when a child has shown you something about themselves that is unmistakable. "She already is," Marcus said. And that was the difference, stated without stating it, between the man Catherine Voss had assumed she was looking at and the man she had actually been looking at all along. One was a person waiting to become something. The other was a person who had quietly, steadily, without anyone's permission or applause, already become it, who had built a career of real consequence, raised a daughter of real character, and carried both of these things through a grief that would have diminished many people, and had come out the other side not hardened but somehow more purely himself. Catherine Voss's own associate, who had shared the small laugh earlier and had been conspicuously silent since, found something on his clipboard that required his sudden and complete attention. Later, weeks later, in a conversation she would have with her own operations director about hiring practices and the assumptions embedded in their company's evaluation processes, Catherine Voss would describe this afternoon as the moment she understood the difference between the kind of intelligence that announces itself and the kind that simply, quietly, builds things that last. She would not use Marcus's name, but she would think of him, and she would think of Lily, crouching beside the wheel, narrating her own investigation into the world with complete and unhurried confidence. They left the dealership in the early evening, after Marcus had completed what he had come to complete. Not a purchase, as it turned out, but a consultation, a manufacturer's request that he evaluate the production model against the original design specifications, the kind of quiet professional errand that looked from the outside like nothing at all and was, from the inside, the natural continuation of a career built entirely from such moments. Lily held his hand in the parking lot. The light was doing the thing it does in November evenings, going gold and then going fast, the sky shifting through its closing sequence with the same indifference to audience that Marcus had always found quietly comforting about the natural world. It didn't perform. Simply was. Lily had a brochure she had asked Robert Ains if she could keep, and she held it under her arm with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who has acquired something valuable. She had asked Robert 3 questions before they left, about the brake calipers, about why the exhaust had 2 outlets instead of 1, and about whether the car could drive underwater, the last of which Robert had answered with complete seriousness, explaining the relevant physics until Lily nodded and said that made sense, and Marcus had stood beside them and felt something that did not have a simple name but that lived in the neighborhood of gratitude. In the car, the 10-year-old sedan, immaculate beneath its years, Lily buckled herself in and looked at the brochure and then looked out the window and then said, without any particular preamble, "That lady said sorry." "She did," Marcus said. Was she actually sorry, or was she just saying it? Marcus considered this. He considered it genuinely, the way he considered all of Lily's questions, not looking for the answer that would satisfy her quickly, but for the one that was true. I think she was learning to be, he said. Lily thought about this. That counts, she decided, with the judicial finality she brought to moral conclusions. Marcus looked at her in the rearview mirror for a moment. She was already back to the brochure, tracing the lines of the car's profile with one finger, studying it with the same focused attention she brought to everything that interested her. She had his eyes. She had Clara's curiosity. She had something that was entirely her own. A particular quality of presence, a groundedness, the ability to say the true thing clearly and without cruelty and then move on, which is rarer and more valuable than most people understand. He thought about Clara sometimes in moments like this, not with the acute, destabilizing grief of the early years, but with a quieter feeling, something like acknowledgement. She would have loved today. Not the professional part, not the reversal, not the moment of recognition. Clara had never been particularly interested in recognition of any kind. She would have loved Lily in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, face solemn with the importance of it. She would have loved Lily walking up to Catherine Voss and saying the true thing in her clear, undecorated voice. She would have loved the brochure under the arm, the questions about the brake calipers, the underwater driving inquiry delivered without irony. Marcus drove through the evening light and did not need anything from that day beyond what it had already given him. He had not gone to the dealership to be seen. He had never, in any meaningful sense, needed to be seen. He had gone because the work required it and because Lily had asked if she could come and he had said yes, as he nearly always said yes to Lily, because her presence in any situation made the situation better, and he had known this since the first week of her life and had not stopped knowing it since. The validation that the afternoon had provided, the recognition, the apology, the quiet rearrangement of Catherine Voss's assumptions. None of it changed anything that was already true. It had always been true. That was perhaps the point. The man that the afternoon had revealed was not a man who had been created by the revelation. He was a man who had existed, completely and consistently, before anyone in that showroom had thought to look. He would exist just as completely after. The work would continue. Lily would grow. The engine he had helped design would run in cars driven by people who would never know his name, and he would find this not diminishing but somehow correct. The right relationship between the maker and the made, the right kind of anonymity, the kind that is chosen rather than imposed. At a red light, Lily looked up from the brochure. "Daddy," she said, "when I'm older, can I design engines too?" Marcus looked at her in the mirror. The light went green. "You can design whatever you want," he said, and he meant it in every direction, as permission, as confidence, as the fullest possible expression of everything he had spent the last 7 years, quietly and without audience, trying to give her. They drove home through the November evening, the old car running exactly as it should, as it always did, because he knew how to take care of things that mattered. And that, in the end, was the whole of the story.